In this lesson, we'll be talking about a decision-making tool in the face of hazards when risk is present, including the use of risk mitigation strategies. We've talked about risk as the likelihood of harm due to hazard exposure. One way to assess risk is to consider the likelihood of harm, plotted here on the y-axis, and the resulting consequence on the x-axis. Written in an equation, risk is the product of the likelihood of an incident occurring and the severity of the consequences. Chances are that you've intuitively used this kind of analysis already when making split-second decisions in your everyday life. Let's say you're faced with a really busy road and you have to either dash across the road at a gap in the traffic or walk 100 meters down the street to an overpass. You might quickly decide that running across the road is a bad idea because the likelihood of getting hit by a car on a busy road is high, and the consequences of that happening are really bad. So in other words, the risk is too high. And you take the risk reduction step of walking to the overpass, therefore reducing the likelihood of an incident with bad consequences. In this lesson, we'll use the risk matrix as a decision-making and risk management tool. The matrix is a useful tool to help organize your thoughts in real time when you have to make a decision in the presence of risk. We can formalize the risk matrix in the 4 boxes that you see here, where in the bottom left, we have our low-risk green quadrant, where both the likelihood and the consequence of something happening are low. If you select your camp location in the backcountry, you ideally want to know that your daily tasks, like getting water or going to the bathroom, fall into this category. This is the go zone. In the top right quadrant, we have the red no-go zone, where risk is high. And these are actions or decisions where you come to the conclusion that the likelihood and the consequence of something happening is just too high and there's no clear way of reducing the risk to make the situation safe. So it's just simply not pursued. For example, in the campsite selection example, setting up camp in an avalanche zone after a big snowfall may fall into this zone. The orange zones shown here are where the situation is less clear, and this is where decision-making needs to be especially deliberate. In the bottom right box, we have a space where the consequence is really high, but the likelihood of something happening is quite low. In the top left box, we have an area where the likelihood is high, but the consequences are lower. There are rarely strict boundaries between these quadrants. The orange zone may be a go or it may be a no-go. And these are the areas where risk management becomes key. So let's revisit that backcountry campsite selection decision. Let's say you're selecting a campsite in bear country, and team members will be going to a secluded latrine location by themselves. So the chance of running into a bear is small, but the consequence of encountering a grumpy old grizzly bear are high. So this pushes the campsite location out of the green and into the orange box. Here, you need to pause and think about what risk reduction measures you can take. For the bathroom bear situation, this might be to take bear spray with you or to set up a buddy system. But it only turns into a go scenario if you are sure that the measures are enough to mitigate the risk, because bear encounters can cause serious injury. Other considerations center on the likelihood of an incident, and it may include the frequency of reported bear encounters, visibility and being able to see a bear approaching, among other factors. In the upper left orange quadrant, the situation has a high likelihood of something happening, but the consequences of an incident are lower. So for example, campsite selection next to a stream might be convenient for many reasons, but it might have mosquitoes. And while annoying, they pose low consequence itchy bites in most parts of the world. So the risk of mosquito bites can be mitigated through bug spray and mosquito nets, and the consequence of being bitten is generally low. So here, the go thresholds might be lower than in the bear scenario because you're more willing to accept the consequences. Additionally, it's important to note that this risk matrix is not a one-size-fits-all approach, but rather a tool that field teams can use in a dynamic situation. Decisions need to be evaluated on a case-by-case basis, and those rely on the expertise and the experience of the team, the comfort level of individuals, among many other factors. So let's summarize the 3 general strategies that we can employ to deal with risks in the field. Number 1, minimize the risk. You can consider addressing known risks by developing standard mitigation strategies and practices in advance to set clear expectations of how the team will manage the risk. The example of camping in bear country is an obvious candidate for this approach, setting protocols in advance that make expectations crystal clear for the entirety of your fieldwork. These standards and expectations might become part of a code of conduct, which we're going to talk more about in Module 3. The second approach is to avoid hazards or to create alternatives. So for example, changing a campsite due to a new hazard that just emerged, like a flooded stream after a big rainstorm, or outsourcing risk management to a professional mountain guide or a team member who is experienced in navigating a specific hazard-prone situation. And then the third approach is to accept some residual risks. When camping in bear country, there is always a small chance you may encounter a bear, but that risk is low enough that the field team can accept it. However, it's still important to make sure that all team members are aware of the risk and actively employ mitigation protocols. Sometimes residual risks are formally accepted using assumption of risk forms and by establishing institutional practices. For example, no fieldworks conducted above tree line during thunderstorms. In this lesson, we introduced a tool to facilitate decision-making by assessing the likelihood and consequence of a particular risk. This can be a helpful approach if you are feeling overwhelmed or confused about how to negotiate a situation that includes risk. In the next lesson, we'll introduce ways to prepare for incidents in the field.